Hello everyone. I hope this video finds you well. I want to start off by apologizing that I haven't been able to get a video up until today. I've been a little bit under the weather the past few days and just haven't been feeling well enough to go ahead and get on here and create this video. Um, I do also want to say that I think you guys did very, very well with your first discussion board and research briefs. Um, the quality of the posts were fantastic. Keep it up. I really appreciate the effort that you guys put into what you were talking about and the responses that you gave one another. You guys covered the material extremely well, and your personal insights were wonderful to go ahead and read. I know that you guys have already started on the week 2 material. Even so, I do want to go ahead and give you kind of a brief overview of what living in prison is like and what some of the information you'll be covering in this week's readings, if you haven't already covered it, will be. Um, Otherwise, I don't have much for you guys this week. Please feel free again to contact me at any point in time if you have questions. Again, I work 7 to 3, but I'm available for emails, texts, phone calls, or setting a time to meet up after that. Weekends, I'm free the entire weekend. If you do have any questions regarding grading or any other concerns with the class, just go ahead and reach out to me. It's no problem at all. So to get us started, I'm just going to go ahead and read off what I have already written as far as kind of a summary for this week. I'm sorry if it's dull, but just hang in there with me. So this week, living in prison, let's first consider the 3 models of incarceration. The 3 that have been used since the 1940s are the custodial model, the rehabilitation model, and the reintegration model. The custodial model emphasizes security, discipline, and order for the purposes of incapacitation, deterrence, or retribution. This is what typically prevailed prior to World War II and is still kind of, involved in what we see today. The rehabilitation model was developed during the 1950s and views the organizational aspects of corrections to be directed towards actually reforming offenders rather than just incapacitating them or used as deterrents. Towards this end, a variety of different types of treatment programs are used, including the one that I currently work in at Southwestern Illinois Correctional Center. The reintegration model emphasizes the maintenance of the offender's ties to the community and family with the recognition that, the purpose of being incarcerated is to serve your time and then go back into the community. It recognizes that and emphasizes returning into the community and tries to make that reintegration as smooth as possible. So accordingly, inmates are actually given greater freedom and responsibility as they approach their release. In America, prisons are actually, as you all know, operated at the federal and state levels. Many prisons are older buildings, and they're located typically in rural areas. My prison, for example, kind of stands out a little bit. We're not very rural. We're right in the middle of East St. Louis, right off of 64. But it is an older building. It actually used to be a high school that was converted into a prison. So you see a variety of different types of buildings, but typically they're going to be rural, kind of separated from society rather than right in the middle of it. Facilities for men operate at different levels, maximum, minimum, and a couple in between. Those levels actually restrict inmate movement to a greater or to a lesser degree. And because so few women are in prison, most states actually house female offenders in a single facility. Most prison facilities are owned and operated by governments, but many states and the federal government do contract with private corporations that provide prison services, including housing inmates and privately owned facilities. And some of those facilities also, hire their own corrections officers and other facility staff rather than them being strictly government employees. When considering living in prison, we should definitely touch on the makeup of offenders. To start, the overwhelming majority of inmates in both federal and state prisons are male. A majority of federal inmates are drug offenders, and fewer federal prisoners are serving sentences for violent offenses when compared to state institutions, prisoners in state institutions. Federal prisoners are widely believed to be a more sophisticated type of criminal, typically from a higher socioeconomic status than your typical state prisoner. The majority of federal inmates are also white, whereas in state prisons, a large number of inmates are of racial or ethnic minority groups. Now that we have an idea of who is in prison, let's consider why so many are incarcerated. There are 5 factors that have been put forward to explain the growing incarceration rate. First, there has been a nationwide trend for the police to make more arrests and for courts to impose incarceration for those convicted of committing crimes. This obviously leads to a higher number of new prison admissions, but also a high number of former inmates returning to prison. Second, tougher sentencing laws have resulted in inmates spending more time on average in prison. Third, a large number of new prisons have been built in recent decades. And this has greatly expanded society's ability to actually incarcerate people. So obviously, the more prisons you have, the more space you have to put people in them. Number 4, we have to consider the war on drugs. It has resulted in the imprisonment of large numbers of drug offenders. And finally, state and political factors such as the proportion of population who are political conservatives are also related to higher incarceration rates. Obviously, the problem of prison crowding should be considered when we are considering how many more people are actually being incarcerated. And it has become a more pressing issue as greater numbers of offenders have been sentenced to prison. Um, Correctional officials are responsible for providing humane treatment and living conditions for offenders who are sent to their facilities. And the federal courts sometimes actually intervene when correctional officials fail to meet these responsibilities. Several strategies have been identified for dealing with prison overcrowding, including the null strategy, which is pretty much do nothing, just let it play out, and the prison construction strategy, which we already kind of touched on, which is to build more facilities to meet the demand. When living in such a system, people do begin to develop various ways to deal with their time. The inmate code is an example of this. It is a set of norms and values that develops within the prison social system. It defines a model prisoner in the eyes of inmates and provides a code of conduct that directs inmates on how they should behave in prison, how they should function in prison. An inmate who projects toughness, keeps distance from staff, and does their own time is typically held in high regard. A prisoner who is emotionally viewed as weak or is close with the staff or snitches to staff on other inmates and gets involved in other people's business doesn't usually enjoy a high status. Scholars have debated the source of the prison subculture. Some people, such as Clemmer and Sykes, argue that it develops as a response to the prison environment itself, almost as like a coping mechanism to deal with everything that's going on there and the number of people. The different adaptive roles reflect different ways in which inmates find to actually relieve that pain, the pain that they're facing from being imprisoned. Other scholars, such as Irwin and Cressy, argue that the prison subculture is primarily imported from the world outside the prison walls and is just taken over from that environment and kind of exacerbates the social norms that you see when people are free. In male prisons, norms really emphasize autonomy, self sufficiency, and the ability to cope with one's own problems. Men are, again, expected to just do their own time, not be concerned with anybody else's time or other people, and they share very little with one another. This is one of the interesting things that makes kind of my position at a male low security prison, the one in East St. Louis, Southwestern Correctional, is that we're asking them to do the exact opposite. We're asking them as men to actually share and try to build community, which is very, very difficult. Women, on the other hand, develop close ties. They form kind of small groups similar to families, and those families provide emotional support. They share their resources, and women actually place fewer restrictions than men do on sexual and emotional conduct. Two more important issues in women's prisons are sexual misconduct and incarcerated mothers. Sexual misconduct instances, which would be instances in which prison officials sexually exploit female inmates, threatens facility security, creates stress, and trauma for those involved, exposes the agency and staff to potential lawsuits, creates a hostile work environment, and victimizes people who are the most vulnerable. One of the things that we have to remember is that with prisoners, they are the ones out of power. So, any abuse of that power, especially sexual, creates a slew of issues within any environment, particularly within the prison environment. Um, Monetary civil judgments awarded to women for mistreatment while in prison can be extremely costly as a result of this. To deal with the problem of sexual abuse in prison, states have enacted statutes prohibiting sexual relations with correctional clients. Um, regarding other special topics when considering women in prison, incarcerated mothers. Um, a majority of women prisoners were the primary caretakers of children before entering prison, and over half of these women do not see their children while serving their sentence. This situation can cause great anxiety for many incarcerated mothers, and to deal with this issue, some states have implemented programs that allow mothers to see their children for extended periods, during which time they are allowed physical contact, which actually helps to rebuild that bond. Some states even provide transportation for children and allow them to stay overnight with their mothers. We're also starting to see slowly these programs trickle down to men, where men are able to spend more time with their children and have physical contact with their children because men can be the primary care providers for their children as well, especially in situations where you see drug use as a problem or as the reason for the incarceration. Usually it's not just one parent or the other who is using, it's typically both parents. So being able to bring children back into the lives of male offenders as fathers is becoming a little more common practice and is starting to gather some steam. Lastly, healthcare. Providing medical care to prison inmates is required by law. Failing to do so is viewed as cruel by the courts. Bloodborne diseases such as HIV/AIDS or hepatitis C and the aging prison population are factors that make providing adequate medical services to prisoners challenging. Currently, the elderly are the highest growing prison population in the United States, even though many people will believe that offenders age out of crime. So we really have to recognize some of the factors that make providing health care and adequate health care extremely difficult within a prison setting. So that's all I have for you guys this evening. Again, I apologize for the delay in getting this video up. I look forward to your discussion board posts for this week, and don't forget your first current event responses are due this week as well. These are, again, intended to be a little less formal than the discussion board. It's really for you guys to kind of talk more and play with your thoughts and think about what you've been reading and apply it to what's going on in the world today. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I'll be talking to you soon. Bye.